They told her to destroy the personal effects. She kept the letters instead. According to the official Blackwood Estate archives, this single act of defiance exposed a decades-long conspiracy that nearly toppled one of England's most powerful families. By the end of this story, you'll discover 3 shocking truths that rock the entire aristocracy. But before we get to the explosive revelation hidden in the Duchess's private diary, you need to know what she discovered in the Duke's soul. It changed everything. The year was 1823, and the carriage wheels screamed in protest as they churned through the mud-soaked lane leading to Blackwood Manor. Nestled deep in the unforgiving heart of Northumberland, the estate wasn't so much a home as a fortress against the world, a monolith of dark granite that seemed to absorb the meager autumn light. Eleanor Vance clutched the worn leather of her satchel, her knuckles white. Inside were her only treasures, a handful of books and a letter of employment that felt more like a summons. She was 24, an orphan, and possessed an education that society deemed unseemly for a woman of no means. This position, governess to the children of Duke Alistair Beaumont, was an act of desperation. The agency had been blunt. 5 governesses in 2 years, Miss Vance, the proprietor had warned. None have lasted. The Duke is difficult. The children, more so. The main doors opened to reveal a hall that smelled of damp stone and beeswax. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose face seemed carved from the same granite as the manor, assessed Eleanor with a single, sweeping glance. Miss Vance, you are to go to the Duke's study at once. The study was a cavern of shadows and silence, dominated by a desk the size of a small boat and shelves groaning with leather-bound books that hadn't been touched in years. And there, silhouetted against a rain-lashed window, stood the Duke of Blackwood. Alistair Beaumont was a man forged from winter, tall and severe, with hair as black as a raven's wing and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He radiated an aura of command so potent it felt like a physical pressure. He didn't turn. You are the new one. His voice was low, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth. The agency assures me you are accomplished. The word was laced with a fine, sharp contempt. Eleanor curtsied, her heart hammering against her ribs. I will do my best, Your Grace. Your best will be irrelevant if you fail at your only true task, he said, finally turning. His gaze was intense, analytical. My children are to be managed, kept quiet, kept out of my way. Teach them their letters, basic French, sums. Do not fill their heads with sentiment or fanciful notions. They are Beaumonts. They require discipline, not coddling. Is that understood? Perfectly, Your Grace. He took a step closer, his height and presence overwhelming. I have read your file. The daughter of a penniless clergyman, educated on charity. You are here because I have exhausted all other options. Do not mistake this for an opportunity. It is a post. You are a servant. Remember your place. The words were designed to wound, to establish the vast, unbridgeable chasm between them. We've all faced moments where someone in power tries to make us feel small, haven't we? For Eleanor, this was that moment. She lifted her chin, her gaze steady. I understand my duties, Your Grace. For a fleeting second, something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, at her lack of cowering, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Good, Mrs. Gable will show you to your quarters. You will meet the children in the morning. He turned back to the window, a dismissal as clear as a slammed door. The children were less like children and more like ghosts haunting the cavernous nursery. Arthur, the 10-year-old heir, had his father's posture and none of his confidence. He sat rigidly, his small shoulders already burdened with the weight of a dukedom he was terrified to inherit. Thomas, age 7, was a whirlwind of silent, nervous energy, his eyes darting to every shadow. And then there was Catherine, 5 years old with her late mother's wide, sapphire blue eyes. She hadn't spoken a word in the 2 years since the Duchess's death. She simply sat, clutching a small porcelain doll, lost in a world no one could enter. Eleanor knew then that the Duke's instructions were impossible. These children didn't need discipline. They needed to be brought back to life. Stay with me. The real scandal was just beginning. Days bled into weeks. Eleanor ignored the Duke's cold mandate and instead followed her own. She discovered Thomas had a fascination with the natural world. So their lessons became expeditions into the manor's overgrown gardens to identify plants. their names whispered first in English, then in Latin. For Arthur, who buckled under the pressure of his studies, she reframed history not as a list of dates and battles, but as stories of men, flawed, frightened men, who were thrust into power. But Catherine remained a fortress of silence. One rainy afternoon, Eleanor sat with her, not trying to speak, but simply humming a soft melody from an old Italian lullaby her own mother had sung to her. She did this for an hour. As she was about to leave, a tiny, almost inaudible whisper reached her. Ancora. Again. Eleanor froze, her heart seizing. She turned to see Catherine looking at her, truly looking, for the first time. She began to hum again, her own eyes filling with tears. That night she described the moment in her journal, a document now preserved in the county archives. She wrote, "It was not a victory of teaching, it was a victory of patience. I realized then that the silence in this house was not empty. It was filled with unspoken grief." The Duke observed all of this from a distance. He said nothing, his expression as unreadable as ever. But Mrs. Gable informed Eleanor that he had begun asking about the children's lessons. A first. What she didn't know was that behind the scenes, a storm was gathering. The Duke's cousin, Lord Harrington, a man with a politician's smile and a predator's eyes, was a frequent visitor, his presence always leaving a chill in the air. This brings us to the first shocking truth that would soon be revealed. The Duke's isolation wasn't just grief, it was a calculated defense. He was a man under siege, and he didn't even know it. The breaking point came in mid-November. The Duke was hosting a critical political dinner. The French trade envoy and a Prussian diplomat were in attendance, and the success of a major treaty hung in the balance. As was customary for a governess in a great house, Eleanor was expected to dine with the family and guests, a silent ornament meant to showcase the household's propriety. The Duke made his intentions clear just before they entered the dining room. "You will speak only when spoken to, Miss Vance. Your opinions are not required." The dinner was a tense affair. The Duke, fluent in French, navigated the conversation with the envoy skillfully. But then the Prussian diplomat, Baron von Hesse, turned to the Duke and began speaking rapidly in German about a complex clause in the treaty. Eleanor watched in horror as a flicker of panic crossed the Duke's face. He understood formal German, but the Baron's regional dialect and technical vocabulary left him floundering. He attempted a reply, a broad, agreeable statement, but he misunderstood the nuance. Eleanor saw the Baron's eyes narrow in confusion, bordering on offense. A costly diplomatic incident was brewing at his own table. She couldn't let it happen. Taking a steadying breath, she spoke, her voice clear and calm in perfect, fluent German. "Baron, I believe His Grace means to say that the shipping tariffs will be reviewed quarterly, not waived entirely. A matter of policy compliance, you understand." Silence descended upon the table. The Baron's face cleared, and he nodded, relieved. "Ah, precisely. My apologies for the complex phrasing." Every eye was on Eleanor. The Duke's face was a mask of cold fury, his knuckles white where he gripped his fork. The French envoy's wife, attempting to diffuse the tension, turned to Eleanor with a saccharine smile. How charming! A governess with a little German. Then, to test her further, she quoted a line from Dante in its original Italian. Without missing a beat, Eleanor replied in flawless Italian, offering a corresponding line from Petrarch. The conversation shifted, the guests now intrigued, testing her. A question in Spanish, a comment in Portuguese. She answered them all, her voice even, her manner modest. When the guests finally retired to the drawing room, the Duke cornered her near the fireplace. His voice was a low, vicious snarl. "What was that? A pathetic attempt to display your cheap accomplishments? You are a governess, not a diplomat. You embarrassed me." Years of being underestimated, of being judged by her station instead of her mind, coalesced into a single point of defiance. She stood taller, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. Her next words would echo through the history of the Beaumont family. "I speak 7 languages, sir." Her voice didn't waver. It cut through the tension in the room, silencing him completely. French, German, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin, in addition to English. I did not learn them as cheap accomplishments. I learned them because books were the only inheritance my father could leave me. I learned them because knowledge is the only currency I possess. And I use them tonight not to embarrass you, Your Grace, but to save you from embarrassing yourself and this entire nation." She curtsied, turned, and walked out of the room, leaving the Duke of Blackwood utterly speechless, his rage replaced by a stunned, unreadable expression. From across the room, an influential dowager countess who had witnessed the exchange murmured to her companion, loud enough for all to hear, "Well, it seems the Duke has found something far more valuable than a governess." Eleanor expected to be dismissed by morning. Instead, a summons came. The Duke was waiting for her not in his study, but in a room she hadn't known existed, the late Duchess's private library. It had been sealed for 2 years, a shrine of dust and memory. He looked broken. The armor of his arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability. "She spoke 4 languages," he said, his voice hoarse as he gestured to the books. "She tried to teach me Italian. I told her I was too busy." He walked to a small writing desk, untouched since its owner's death. "The night she died, I was in London, arguing over a shipping bill. She had been writing to me for weeks, telling me she felt unwell. I dismissed it as feminine fragility." He finally looked at Eleanor, his eyes haunted. "The shame of that. It has been my prison. I sealed this room. I sealed myself off from the children because they have her eyes. I pushed everyone away. My cousin, Lord Harrington, has been advising me to, in his words, consolidate my affairs, delegate my responsibilities. I now see he was simply isolating me further." This was the second shocking truth. The Duke's cruelty was a shield, not a sword. It was the self-loathing of a man drowning in guilt. According to Dr. Margaret Thornberry, historian and expert on Regency-era inheritance law, isolating a grieving heir was a common tactic for ambitious relatives seeking to gain control of an estate. The Beaumont case is a textbook example. He sank into a chair. "I cannot do this alone anymore. I need you to go through her things, her letters, her diaries. I need to know what I missed. I need you to help me put the pieces back together." He looked up at her, his pride in ashes. "Please, Eleanor." It was the first time he had used her name. And in that moment, she was no longer just a governess. She was an ally. What would you do in this situation? Tasked with excavating the secrets of a dead woman for the man who loved her? For the next week, Eleanor lived in the Duchess's library. She meticulously cataloged the books, sorted the correspondence, and read the diaries. The Duchess Arabella had been a brilliant, vibrant woman. Her journals, preserved to this day, paint a picture of a mind slowly being suffocated by loneliness and a strange, persistent illness. Then Eleanor found it. Tucked away in a locked folio, she found a series of letters from the Duchess to her sister. The handwriting grew progressively weaker. October 12, 1821. "The new tonic Dr. Anselm prescribes leaves a bitter, metallic taste. Alistair is in London. Harrington assures me it is the finest remedy." November 3, 1821. "My limbs feel heavy as lead. I cannot keep food down. Harrington is ever present, so solicitous. He brings the tonic himself each morning." Eleanor's blood ran cold. She cross-referenced the dates with the Duke's travel records, which were part of the estate documents. He had been away during every one of the Duchess's downturns. Lord Harrington had been there every single time. And Dr. Anselm? He was the cousin's personal physician. The final damning piece of evidence was in the Duchess's diary. On the last page she ever wrote, she had scrawled a few words, not in English, but in a desperate mix of Portuguese and Latin, languages Harrington wouldn't know. Veneno, auxilium, frater ejus. Poison, help, his brother. Except frater could also mean cousin. This was it, the third and most explosive truth. The Duchess hadn't simply died. She had been murdered. Slowly, systematically, with arsenic, a poison known to mimic the symptoms of consumption. Lord Harrington stood to inherit the entire dukedom if Alistair died without a male heir of age, or if he could be proven mentally incompetent from grief. Historical records from the Royal Archives show that inheritance disputes in the 1810s and 20s were notoriously vicious, often involving accusations of insanity. Eleanor felt the weight of the discovery settle on her. This was no longer about grief or diplomacy. This was about murder and treason against a noble house. Anyone who stood up to those in power knows this fear. She took the diary and the letters and went to find the Duke. She found him with the children in the garden. For the first time, he was on his knees in the dirt, helping Thomas examine a beetle. He looked up as she approached, a flicker of something like hope in his eyes. That look almost broke her. "Your Grace," she said, her voice trembling, "we must speak, in private." In the study, she laid it all out. The letters, the diary, the dates. She watched as understanding, then horror, then a terrifying glacial rage transformed his features. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He simply stared at the evidence. The world he knew crumbling around him. "He brought me the tonic himself," Alistair whispered, reading from his wife's letter. "That viper. He sat at my table. He advised me. He watched me grieve for the woman he was killing." He stood up, the movement so abrupt it sent his chair crashing backward. At that exact moment, the butler entered. "My lord, Lord Harrington is here to see you." The timing was no coincidence. Harrington walked in, his face a mask of false sympathy. "Alistair, my dear cousin, I heard about the spectacle at dinner. I came to see if you are well. Perhaps it is time you took a long rest. I can manage the estate's affairs." "Get out," Alistair said, his voice dangerously soft. Harrington's smile faltered. "Now, Alistair, this is precisely the sort of emotional outburst I feared. The strain. I know what you did." Alistair stepped forward, holding up the Duchess's diary. "I know about the tonic, the physician. I know everything." The color drained from Harrington's face. He looked from the Duke to Eleanor, his eyes filled with venom. "You, the clever little governess. You meddling commoner. You have no proof." "Her diary is the proof, written in languages you were too ignorant to read." Eleanor shot back, her fear replaced by a cold resolve. "And according to the solicitor's investigation report, which I'm sure will soon be commissioned, arsenic is easily traceable." Harrington lunged, not for the Duke, but for Eleanor, his face contorted in a desperate snarl. But Alistair was faster. He caught his cousin's arm in a grip of iron, his rage finally erupting. "You will not touch her. You will not speak to her. You have poisoned this house for the last time." He threw Harrington back toward the door. "Guards!" The scandal was immediate and absolute. The subsequent investigation, detailed in the Northumberland County records dated January 1824, confirmed arsenic poisoning. Lord Harrington was arrested and, facing undeniable evidence, took his own life in his cell before trial. The Beaumont name was saved from public ruin, but the foundations of the family were forever altered. In the aftermath, the manor began to breathe again. The Duke devoted himself to his children, his guilt now channeled into a fierce, protective love. He and Eleanor became a team, their relationship built on a foundation of shared trauma and mutual respect. One evening, as they sat in the now-restored Duchess's library, he turned to her. "This family owes you a debt that can never be repaid. I owe you my life, my children's lives. I cannot ask you to be a governess any longer." He took her hand. "Eleanor, marry me." It was a proposal that would defy every convention of their society. But looking at him, at the man she had pulled back from the brink, Eleanor knew her answer. "Yes," she whispered, "but on one condition. I will not be an ornamental duchess. The wealth of this estate, this title, we will use it for education access, for the people who live on these lands. Dignity isn't given, it's claimed." Their marriage was a quiet affair, but its impact was a seismic shock to the aristocracy. With the Dowager Countess's powerful endorsement, however, society had little choice but to grudgingly accept. The new Duchess of Blackwood didn't host lavish balls. She founded a school. This focus on heritage stewardship and a philanthropic legacy was revolutionary. She used her command of languages to build a curriculum that was unheard of for a village school. She insisted on financial transparency for the estate, diverting funds into a scholarship fund for promising local children. Her work on family wellness and youth literacy became a model for other reform-minded nobles. Years later, standing on a balcony overlooking the thriving estate, Alistair watched his wife, Duchess Eleanor, laughing with their own two children alongside Arthur, Thomas, and a chattering Catherine. He had sought a servant and found a savior. She had sought a post and found a purpose. The quietest voices truly do carry the truths people fear most. Through their partnership in public service and their commitment to sustainable stewardship and historical preservation, they transformed a legacy of grief into one of hope, proving that true nobility is not a matter of birth, but of courage, integrity, and the strength to build a safe community for everyone. If this story of justice and defiance moved you, hit like to help spread this untold story. Share this with someone who needs to know the truth about aristocratic society, and subscribe for more historical revelations like this. The truth matters.